Hello, I'm Amanda from the AFM Macaque Coalition. This International Macaque Week, we are bringing you a series of short anecdotes from macaque people all over the world, all about macaques. Stay tuned for today's episode.
Hi, I'm Erin Riley. I'm a professor in the Department of Anthropology at San Diego State University. And I've been working with various species of macaque monkeys maybe 30 years now. I started working originally with captive macaques, working with 5 different species, learned a lot about their social behavior and how complex and interesting their behaviors are, and lots about personalities. But for most of my career, I have done field-based research on the ways in which macaques and people interface in all sorts of different contexts. And I work primarily on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, which is a pretty unique place ecologically because there are 7 different species of macaques that are found only on that island. And the island has very unique vegetation as well as other unique species that are found only there. So it's a pretty interesting place to work. And it's been a privilege to be able to be there for so long. So macaques, my love story of macaques, I think. I thought I'd share a couple of anecdotes from my experience when I was doing my dissertation research in central Sulawesi, so the central area of Sulawesi, working specifically with the Tonkian macaque, so Macaca tonkiana. And this was a site where no one had really worked before in doing research on Tonkian macaques. Most of what we knew about Tonkian macaques came from semi-captive research. So it was a bit of work to kind of get a project off the ground. And I am grateful to all of my local collaborators and friends and field assistants who made that really possible. But I had to start from scratch in the sense of, figuring out where groups live and trying to habituate them to human presence, right? So that we could follow them and observe their behavior. And one of the groups that we ended up quite successfully habituating to our presence so that we could follow them was called the Ancha group, and it lived very close to a village. And so they were our village group in a sense that I was trying to understand the impact of human activity on Tonkian macaque behavior and ecology. And it was a very small group. They had a very small home range, so the area that they use to gain resources that they need to survive. And of course, I say of course, but we named every single individual in the group. It's a somewhat common practice now in primatology. And one of the males in the group was named Buddy. And I really liked Buddy a lot. And I guess the 2 anecdotes I wanted to share really kind of reflect my understanding of macaques as, individuals with personalities and the process by which we study animals in the wild. I think historically it was always thought of like, okay, we come in, we collect data on these animals, and then we leave, right? And there wasn't much discussion about how there is a mutual relationship that unfolds in the process of doing field-based research, where trying to get these animals accustomed to our presence it's a mutually modifying experience. And I don't think I appreciated that initially doing my dissertation research. But some of these stories really kind of showcase the ways in which researchers are quite heavily involved in the lives of the subjects that we're studying. And I think we need to be mindful of that. So I'm kind of giving the essence of my story up front, but I'll kind of circle back around to it. So the first encounter that I wanted to share was following this group. Me and one of my key field assistants would split up in the day to follow the group because they lived in really scrubby area, and so trying to get through and follow, we often lose them because they were traveling on the ground. So I'll never forget this one time where we were following them. And Bade and I, my field assistant, had split up, and I'm on the ground trying to like move through space and stuff. And I didn't realize how close I was getting to the primates, to the group. And of course, we try and keep a distance even when they are habituated. and I'm on the ground kind of moving on, all fours, whatever. And then I literally like stopped, looked up, and Buddy is like right there. And I was like, oh. And of course, in macaque society, it's impolite to stare. And so I found myself staring right in the face of Buddy. And he just kind of looked at me like, oh, hello. And I thought, oh, gosh, and quickly lowered my gaze so as to not come across as a threat. And this was well into the research, so I would like to presume that he knew who I was. But he just gave me a glance and then went back to his foraging, right? And I kind of, did very macaque-like thing, which is, lower the gaze, move back, and, kind of give him a little bit more space. And I thought about it a lot over the years, thinking, wow, I was kind of lucky. He could have attacked me being so close. But again, it made me think, he knows who we are, right? We've been following them like constantly, right? He knows who I am and doesn't perceive me to be a threat, and really tolerated my presence in that very, very close space. And it's something I reflect on a lot. So that's kind of the one thing, and that I wanted to share. And then a related story, and then I'll kind of come full circle about what I think all this means, is another scenario where, again, in following the group, we were basically, doing our thing, daily follows of the group. And we started to hear a bunch of vocalizations, male loud call vocalizations and whatnot. And so we were kind of like, what is happening? And all of a sudden, there were all these different males running about. And I thought, wait, I don't recognize these males. And then we realized that what we were basically in the midst of was what's called an intergroup encounter, right? Where two different groups encounter one another. And this happens for many species. And what we know about primates is that sometimes they are aggressive encounters, right? Meaning involving, interactions. And sometimes they're more neutral or, sometimes even positive, depending on the species and the context. But what I remember about this is that I remember seeing a couple of males and thinking, I don't recognize these males. And then those males saw me and thought, I don't know who that is. And they took off. And then all of a sudden, Buddy emerges. And he emerges in front of me and turns around and gives me this, what we consider to be kind of, what we interpret to be, in terms of macaque behavior, to be soliciting my assistance in chasing after those two males who were unrecognizable to me. And I looked at him, thought, well, I'm a researcher. I'm not supposed to get involved in all this, right? This is your problem, not mine. But it stuck with me in a way because, again, we as researchers, we strive to remain objective, right, in terms of our ability to observe these animals and objectively interpret what we are observing. And we have a number of methods to do that, right? And I think that's it's an important goal for us. At the same time, it became very clear that, we are still present in the lives of these animals. And it was a really good example of where they are involving us in their lives, right? So essentially he was just soliciting, what I interpreted is that he was soliciting my help and chasing after or whatever, of like basically dealing with this intergroup encounter. So what does this all mean, right? And again, it fast forward a number of years, I then made this kind of dynamic a focus of my research. So one of my former master's students and I did what I consider to be a really interesting project. And I want to give kudos to KT, my former student, for really kind of leading it, was to really investigate this process of habituation as not just like this thing that we do so that we can move on and collect our data, but really this mutually modifying process of people, human observers, and their primate study subjects, negotiating this relationship so that we can follow them and observe them, but them also tolerating us and their environment, right? and how we navigate that interface. I think it's a really interesting question. But ultimately, I think what this showcases about macaques certainly is their subjectivities, right? They are individuals with very distinct personalities. And I learned that probably really early on when I studied captive primates. I was responsible for behavioral care management. And but that really came about. I got a sense of that even more so doing field-based research on wild animals. But also that, the extent to which they are flexible and their ability to tolerate us in these spaces where we are trying to observe them. And so we talk a lot about macaque flexibility in terms of responding to changes in their habitat. And that's, some species are pretty good at that, and others maybe less so. Macaques are well known for their flexibility, but I think their flexibility extends in the context of research too. And I think ultimately, it makes me think, if they are willing to tolerate us in those spaces, us being, researchers observing them, then we need to do our best to be able to tolerate them as we move forward and try to find ways to ensure, right, sustainable coexistence of people and macaques as best we can.
Whether it's sharing a post on social media, organizing a fundraiser, or simply learning more about macaques, every little bit helps. So let's unite to raise awareness and empathy for macaques globally. International Macaque Week.